Welcome back to the Attainment Podcast. Growth today spans technology, capital, and human behavior. And the people who build and adapt need to think across all three. Murray Simser is back on the show. He helped build one of the first cloud-based CRM platforms years before Salesforce, marking one of the earliest true SaaS companies. He later led teams at Microsoft, and today he runs Citizen AI, a company rethinking how artificial intelligence and democracy can work together. Murray brings a rare historical lens to the present, connecting past industrial revolutions to this one and AI, and what it means for how we grow, lead, and make progress. Let's get into it.
Yeah, it is a cool medium, but when you think about it, it's really old. It's really old. So
It's the oldest medium of all. When radio came out, people talk about how social media is changing the world now. But I don't think people remember that if we think that social media is messing with people's heads, okay, I don't think that they really remember what radio did when it first became a mass media, because there were early users of radio and it was very specialized and whatever it was. By the 20s and 30s in Britain, North America, and Europe, radio was as common as smartphones, say, or laptop, or mobile device, or tablet. And so, as a transmission mechanism to put content out, they started to do shows on radio. And one of them was called War of the Worlds. Okay. Now, people who are of a certain age remember this because it was sort of told in lore. It was part of education, but it's been forgotten because you're right. Radio is an old mechanism. But we're rediscovering that mass media has massive consequences on society with social media, and the costs are larger. So what happened with War of the Worlds? When the radio show went on, it was about Mars invaders coming to Earth. And in that radio show, people listening to this in their cars, at home, because families used to sit around the radio and listen to these sort of events and these live shows where somebody was actually reading something, it caused a panic. Okay, that the world was being invaded because it was a national show, and so people started phoning their friends. We're being invaded. What do we do? It's Tom Cruise, War of the Worlds, and we saw the consequences of it, and we're living through it again.
amazing, amazing. Yeah, I'd like to pick your brain on that a bit more in terms of how we're living through that again with AI.
Yep.
But yeah, I imagine with the great news from Citizen, the big breakthrough, your first funding round, cracks the ice for subsequent ones, and that's usually how these things goes. They just follow along once you get the first one. I imagine you're going to be on a lot more podcasts and media appearances in the months and years to come.
Well, I certainly hope so. From your mouth to God's ear. Okay, this is the first thing. Yeah, it startups startups have a funny life cycle. They start off with crazy idea, then you put a few bucks into it, you bootstrap, you sort of test out the idea to see if it's getting there. Once you're mature enough in the idea stage, then you go out and talk to friends, family, and the fools that'll invest in the early days to pick up whatever other money you need. And then you move to a more sophisticated group. The friends, family, and fools, by the way, is not pejorative. It's just, anybody who invests at that stage takes the highest risk. And so that's the financial joke that's made. But then you move on to a more sophisticated investor, and that's the angel investment round. Usually you've heard angel investors
Mm-hmm.
before. These are smaller checks, 50, 100 grand total that you're raising, maybe 200,000, maybe up to 500,000. We raised 400,000 in our angel round. And we bootstrapped before that. And then we bootstrapped after that until we got to the place where we were able to then go and do what I'll call a more sophisticated round. Okay. And now you're talking about people who are not what you would call true believers. The angel investors are true believers. These are people who like, yes, I like this. I want to be the guy who makes this happen. I want to win. But the seed round, as we call this one, or pre-seed, whatever your definition is. I mean, if you want to split it up, it can be broken up, but it's the seed round, right? It's professional investors who have done significant due diligence, who have
Mm-hmm.
considered the corporation. They're all accredited and investors are up, if not qualified investors, which is a step above that. They generally are ultra high net worth or ultra high net worth people, because if you're writing a check of whatever size, most people don't put more than 1 to 5% of their portfolio into high risk assets. And so if somebody writes $1 million check, you can you can do the reverse calculation to figure out just how much money you have to make to take that risk. And it was our job to convince those people that that risk was worth taking. And that we de-risked the portfolio. And indeed, you're correct. We got a $1 million Canadian investment, the lead investor in this seed round, and we're looking to close 2. And we're going to continue that activity until we have sufficient capital to fund our go-to-market strategy, which we were briefly talking a little bit about before we started this.
But this isn't your first rodeo, because I went back to take a look at when you started eAssist back in Silicon Valley in 1999. I looked at the year again and I thought, wait a sec, was SaaS even a thing in 1999?
No, we invented SaaS. That was what we invented, okay? By the way, cloud was called SaaS before it was called cloud. It's the same stuff, but in the end, we were, back then, software as a service literally was software as a service. We were putting instances. Okay. And this was before virtualization. This was before sharing of compute resources and transport and storage. So it was unbelievably expensive. And I'll remind you, there were no data centers back then. So when we were offering software as a service, we had to tear the ground up and drag cables from the telecom company that would connect, say, a T1 or a T3 or, whatever pipe you were buying from them, and or coax or whatever it was that was being delivered to deliver the transport back to May West, which is the main connection of the internet in Silicon Valley. We had to connect to that. Okay. Like we had to pay huge quantities of money. So it cost us. Today you could build eAssist for $1 million or $2 million. Okay, because you wouldn't have any of the capital expenses that we had. Back then, we had to buy racks, we had to buy servers, we had to buy licenses, we had to buy cables, we had to buy raised floors, we had to buy HVAC systems to cool the data centers, because they're basically a heat plant, if you think about them. We had to buy wiring and services to install this stuff, and then we had to hire massive quantities of people to manage these data centers. And like you're walking, there's a cable unplugged, the whole thing came down to an hour to find. So this was, when I say software as a service, it was such a huge lift that we had to raise $80+ million to fund the company. And the lion's share of that went to capital expenses. So, when you think about the legacy of eAssist, first, almost everybody's used the software. Okay. I was very proud to have built that. I worked with some wonderful co-founders of mine that, I was one of the co-founders in a group of 5 people. And those people went on to do pretty extraordinary things, every one of them in their own right. But the experience that we had as young guys in our sort of early to mid 20s to the early to mid 30s, that was the range of our ages at the time. We built a platform that takes care of all citizen data for, say, all Canadians. So Service Canada used our software. If you phoned and asked for a passport, or whatever it is Service Canada does these days, you were using our stuff. So whether you were chatting or emailing, or the agent themselves in a call center on a phone, that was all our software that was housing and managing 800 Canada call centers. And so for me, it was more than just a software experience. We ran British Telecom's world, most of the big telcos, most of the big banks. I mean, it was the Global 2000 used our platform. The entire infrastructure of the airline industry in the world on the IATA systems and a variety of other related reservation systems use our software. So we were integral as one of to the entire internet. In an environment that was completely new. And we weren't selling software. We were selling subscriptions to our software in a cloud.
Wow.
And we called that SaaS.
Incredible. So it sounds like eAssist was basically CRM for consumers, whereas...
No, it was the opposite. It was CRM for corporations. And
yes, to serve consumers.
Right.
Yep.
So it wasn't
that's what I meant.
Consumer-facing CRM. There's lots of those today.
Yep. Oh,
this
yes.
one was we bought, and we had a traditional Salesforce. We didn't have, like today, if I was building it, I'd have no Salesforce. I'd say, here's the sign up button, click, how many do you want? But back then you couldn't do that because people didn't trust. They, you know what the number one critique was of that company back in the day? Well, where's my box of software? What do you mean? You know, like that was, you're
Uh,
cheating us because we're not getting the license. You know,
yeah.
it was
Where's the
real
product?
crazy because people
Yeah.
didn't believe it. If it wasn't in a computer
Wow.
in their office at the time,
Mm,
there was something not natural about that. So you got
yeah.
to remember that we.comers, if you want to think about us like that generation, Gen X, okay, our great contribution to the world was making viable two things: the internet and the smartphone. All right. And these two technologies, I think, irrevocably altered the world. And today, nobody could live without them. But at the time, everybody thought we were lunatics, okay, trying to peddle this stuff, whether it was, you know, mobile phone technology or a browser based browser. What's a browser? I don't see you loading disks into there, putting my software. Where's my software? And so, you know, I look at it today. Everybody's freaking out about AI just the same. Oh, I have my data. Where is it? And all this sort of business. I see it in the same way. And that might be a great segue to what you wanted to talk about, is this AI business that's afoot.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that back then, when you bought software, you get a box, and the box is mostly empty and has
Yeah.
a thin slice of a CD in there, but the box is mostly empty. But that was necessary because the psychology of the buyer was, hey, I need a box with my product.
That's correct. And if you think about, go back even further. So now where did the box come from? Okay. So why did the box become a thing? Well, if you think about how computers worked before that, most computers didn't have software. They were just directly programmed into the machine itself. And so you had to know machine language and code and things like this. Software changed that because now a regular person could change the nature of a computer. You didn't have to have an expert supercomputer in the back and pros that know how to twist and turn and knobs and code in sort of language that's unfamiliar. You could now build these little discrete packages and sell them as products. So productizing software came about with companies like Commodore, which was the first really successful personal computer. There were some real weird ones before that, sold like 9 units. But the first multi-million unit PC that was all over the globe was right here in Toronto. And it was a company called Commodore that reinvented how the world worked. And those were the first packages where you bought diskettes that were about that large, that had a hole in them and stuff like this. And they didn't carry much information, but they carried more information than most prior computers. And so you could put video games or you know, software packages like Lotus 123 or these ancient packages, but at the time were revolutionary.
Amazing. What gave you the foresight to start up a SaaS company? I mean, that was a alien concept back then. So you and your co-founders kind of, how do you, and the reason I ask this is because we also have founders or people who are interested in startups listening in. How do you identify the next big thing? What gives you that conviction?
I think I'm going to break that up into two things. Let me answer the history story first, and then I'll talk about what the sort of motivator and drive is. So in my case, I was always a nerd kid that was sort of ostracized, as it were, you know, and so I was always a person who was finding new ideas as a way to sort of cope, you know, with youth and childhood, and the being the short and little kid in the thing until I grew up and, you know, sprouted. That creates a divergent way of seeing the world. And I think that had a large impact on how I saw things. And the way that manifested into the world from that point forward was I was always a tech forward kind of guy, meaning that technologies where I hung my hat or I hid more likely as a kid so I could escape the world that I was in. So that Commodore I spoke to you about, or the VIC-20, the Commodore VIC-20 or the Commodore 64, or the Commodore 128, or the Amiga, which were the 4 generations of Commodore computers. And then along came the Windows-based PS2s and, you know, this sort of stuff, and the Macs and the rest. Playing in that world was playing in a world of software a decade before anybody ever really thought about it. And I was only 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 at the time. At that age, I was adopting tech and I became very aware of the technology's potential as I grew up. And so I think I had an edge in that I was already playing with the stuff I could code. I understood fundamentally how computing worked, and it was natural for me. So by the time I got to university, which was 91 to 95, I was already using email before anybody had email. Okay, so there was this monochrome screen called, there was Pine, and I think it was at the University of Pennsylvania. And I had an email from the University of Pennsylvania that I could use to communicate with you. Now there were maybe thousands of people in the world using it then. And I'm not talking about hundreds of thousands, okay? I'm talking about several thousand people had emails at that point. But just to give you a sense for how early I was, the email system itself was not in a browser or in Windows or in any of that stuff. You had to go into a terminal window and you had to log in to an IP address, and you had to visit a very specific server across the world. Was an accelerant to my knowledge about how this stuff was going to work. And for me, it was natural to understand the internet was coming. And because I was young enough, only, 18, 19 when this started to show up, I naturally understood where this was going. And so anything that I did from that point forward, I always saw it through the lens of technology. Now, that doesn't mean that I invented eAssist overnight. I had the good fortune of aligning myself with very strong mentors. Okay. When I say very strong mentors, if you look at the co-founders of that company, you get George Dow and you get Dan Plaschkes. Okay. These two people are these are ultra high net worth individuals. They're billionaires. And one of them is a billionaire and the other one is say a centimillionaire. And when you have the ability to learn from people like that and contribute at that age, where everybody is in this sort of crazed innovation state that was Silicon Valley, and to be in California when this was going on, there was nothing we couldn't do. Okay. And when I say that, I don't mean that we were right all the time. I just meant our head meant there was nothing we couldn't do. We were single-minded. Now, remember, this is the time when Elon Musk was setting up Zip2. He just moved from Queens. I just moved from Ottawa. I mean, we all ended up in Silicon Valley at this time. I was under 25 years old. So was he. And so we're roughly the same age. And when you're connected, there were very few people who understood that world at the time. Frankly, everybody thought we were nuts. Okay, what the fuck are these on their phone all the time? Like, it's not something that is obvious to people how much slack you have to take by doing that. But because I had great mentors, I had access in a network because of those mentors, access to capital, and I was smart. This all worked out in a way that allowed for us to produce a company. And by the way, it took 3 tries to create this company. And the same group of people. So you never win the first time. All right. You have to reinvent and reinvent and reinvent. And on the 3rd try, we got it. Okay. And that one was the one where we were 5. The joke was we were 5 guys, a dog, and a PowerPoint presentation, and we raised $8 million at a $16 million pre-money valuation from 2 of the biggest and most important Silicon Valley venture capitalists. And we later went on to do mezzanine rounds prior to going public. When we were actually going public on the NASDAQ with this company, our ticker was going to be ECRM. Okay. And we raised a huge amount of money from large companies like CIBC World Markets here in Toronto, Intel Capital in Silicon Valley, and a variety of others that came in who are all very well-known venture capitalists on the West Coast of the United States. And so that experience for me was the equivalent of my moonshot. It gave me my first experience in space. It allowed me to do things that I never thought I could possibly do. Poor boy made good, and off to the races. And the story gets better from there.
Curious, how did you make that leap from very humble beginnings? You wrote about your humble beginnings in this book, recently launched.
Yes.
The Ripple Effect, Networking for Success, with the editors David Tibucci and Mark Keeley, 2 of
That's
Canada's
right.
sort of top political guys. And I just finished it. Really good book, actually. And yeah, in your section, you lay out sort of your journey. But so you started from very humble beginnings. I mean,
As
here in
humble as
Toronto.
you can be, actually.
Yeah,
They don't
exactly.
make humbler than, community housing.
Yeah.
That's, as far as the Canadian strip goes, that's, level 1.
So how do you go from those humble beginnings to Silicon Valley, starting a very forward-thinking tech company, finding these amazing mentors, finding these amazing co-founders? How did you make that leap? Because it does look like you just leapfrogged. I'm guessing it has to do something with networking.
It has everything to do with networking. Okay. So in that book, you'll see my story takes me to Ottawa from, poor boy made good land in Toronto. And, I was afraid of everything. And I don't mean you're afraid. You're kind of a bit of a hubristic kid and, You've got confidence, but perhaps not wisdom. And so one of the things I had was the ability to put myself out there. Okay. So at university, I didn't have the grades. I didn't have the connections. I didn't have the contacts. I didn't even know about how that kind of stuff worked when I got there. I barely knew what the structure of Parliament was. Okay. Like it was, and it's not that I hadn't tried to understand it. I did, but I didn't have any depth or connectivity inside of these things. But one day I got invited to go to a political meeting on campus, just an association. It's one of these, the myriad associations that exist at every university. And I think this one was the Liberal Party of Canada. And very soon thereafter, I found myself in a collegial environment of people that all sort of thought the same thing, wanted to do good stuff. But it turned out that there were a lot of extremely fancy people there. Okay. And when I mean fancy, I mean like Mark Keeley was one of them. All right. He used to be he was Prime Minister Turner's big senior advisor, his main man. Okay. That sort of ran everything and dealt with everything. But Mark was a fixture in the party. Okay. Sergio Marchi, who's on my board of directors or my board of advisors in this thing, he was part of the Liberal Party then. He was actually active as a young politician. He would have been in his bloody 20s then. So, and I was, in my late teens, early 20s kind of deal, and he would have been in his late. So if you start to think about what that type of a mixture does to a kid who's just left Toronto, he's in his first sort of experiences in this new world, Ottawa, the capital of Canada, politics, I get invited to work on the Hill. Okay. And that was for me, I didn't get paid for this. It was come and volunteer in my office, work for the party, go do an investiture, do an election, run doors, bang around, sell memberships, everything you do in a typical party. By the end of the fourth year of school, I was a different person and completely different than I had been at the very beginning. Much more mature, much more self-confident. And it was all just because I put myself out there to say, hey, can I go to this? And so, when you combine that with youthful aggression, okay, where you're trying to do all your best, you don't know what you don't know. It doesn't seem like a big hill to climb to become a Silicon Valley entrepreneur once you've worked for the prime minister. And I happen to have worked for Jean Chrétien when he was in opposition, writing letters for him, okay, responding to people all over Canada. But somebody has to do this work, okay? And it's usually young university students or people just after university that take on these legislative assistant roles. Some are paid, some are volunteer, some are constituency office, some are the Hill office. But by the time you're done that, you walk out of that experience a different person, okay? Because politics is a pretty rough game for people to get involved in. It's as hard as playing professional hockey, okay? Like you're getting punched out left and right. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you're in the firing line, you're done, okay? It's people cutting telephone wire. Like it's a nasty business. And so by the end of that, I had really gotten over a lot of my, what I'll call demons of insecurities. And I was perhaps too confident by half, but it nevertheless carried me to Silicon Valley, as you pointed out, because then I met through my summer job, I met the guy who in the future became my business partner. Okay. So I was doing call center support for computers as a summer job in Toronto at this company. Okay. That my eventual co-founder, that's how we knew each other. So a minimum wage job at a call center led to a relationship with this guy and later hiring me on day one after I left university. All right. And that was, and here's the crazy part, which was totally unintended because I still haven't told you Silicon Valley. Okay. The company he owned got bought by McCowan Duluth, which is today one of the largest firms, like the top 3 private equity firms in the United States. Caprock, up there, at BlackRock, all those guys. That's the scale that we're talking about. And I had, as a consequence, been invited to move to California when those two companies were merged with an American. So the Canadian company that was bought was merged in a leveraged recapitalization with an American firm. And we were invited to the head office. So 3 of us from Toronto, 3 from Phoenix. And because I was his right hand, sort of, executive assistant kind of thing, I learned everything. I negotiated these notes. I was part of the teams. Like 23 years old and I'm doing this stuff. And it was the most extraordinary experience of my entire life. And by the time I was there and I was in in California, I started to see the potential. because now I'm there myself. Okay. I'm not there on somebody else's recognizance. I got down there because of the company being purchased. That had nothing to do with me. But I stayed because I got the desire to create my own, and it was natural for us to do it together. Okay, at that point. And so you then build the business as an idea. And it was a PowerPoint presentation. Because remember, he was doing tech support. So it was a call center. Well, what does the internet do to a call center? How does the internet change a call center? That became CRM. That's what you today call CRM. The answer to that question is CRM. And so CRM, we called it eCRM because it was, this SaaS thing. Instead of old traditional SAP stuff, this was now, you don't have to buy software licenses or anything. You just subscribe. We called that eCRM, and that became the basis for eAssist. And that the company was incorporated in 1998. And then we sold it in 2000.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It really sounds like, and one of the final words in this book by David Tabucci is that networking really is probably the most valuable skill. And it actually, when you think about it, it involves, it's like a meta skill. Like it involves a handful of other very related skills: communication, public speaking,
Yep.
empathy, listening, taking notes. It's a collection of skills. Almost I would think of it as a meta skill. And it sounds like in your case, it's a vehicle through which you can really slingshot yourself into new territories.
Look, I'm telling you something. There's a reason we wrote a book about it. The number one skill lost and it's funny because the whole social world is a network concept, okay? But the number one skill lost in that networked world is the ability to human network. And I'll tell you the difference between networking on the internet and networking, meaning where you create these, and if you want to use quantified data, a human interaction has orders of magnitude more information passing between two people's brains than this interaction on the internet. That's why it's more powerful. And when I say orders of magnitude, I'm talking about one or two. I'm talking about immeasurably more information is exchanged between two people in person for every minute in person or online. And so we need to remind kids of that. You can have 1,000 online interactions that don't mean squat, okay? Because they're so transactional and in the moment that there's no longevity to them. And this is what's lost, okay, in the beautiful network digital cyber world. And I'm not criticizing it because I helped build portions of it, okay? I love the cyber, but it's not a replacement for the relationships that can develop, the trust that can develop, the affinity that can develop between people. And I'll tell you something, nobody goes through the war, and it's a war to create a company, okay? Every day somebody's trying to kill you and wipe you off the face of the earth, if not competitors, your own employee. Like it's a war, okay? Nobody goes to war without having good relations on their side. And if you don't like the people you're doing stuff with, you cannot go to war. A house divided cannot stand and all that. So if you want people to take shots on you, okay, like somebody took shots on me in the party and in the company, in the first job after school, if you want people to take shots, they need to sort of have a feeling for how you behave. What do you look like? How are you when you're pissed off? All the different things that are necessary for somebody to gain a bit of confidence in. And I think that that's the main point. Everybody thinks there's some, they need some kind of special skill to be valuable in networking. And I would say quite the opposite. Networking allows you to find your special skill because other people will place more value on you than you usually place on yourself. So in my case, take the Liberal Party, for example. When I was given all this responsibility, here, go pay this giant bill, go negotiate this contract, go do this, go whatever. Who's going to give me that trust? Who's going to let me go into their house and pick shit up when they're not there and they don't even know me? There's got to be a reason for people to invest in you. And when people know you and like you, that's it. So to be known and to be liked is to get your ass up, get out of the house, go meet people. It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter what's for. You and I, we met at an event. So think about that. All right. And now how many times have we had great relations since? Okay. A couple of interviews, lots of dinners. We meet in different experiences. When somebody says, oh, you know, Sarah, oh, yeah. All that stuff is the quantification of the value of networking. And it comes out in the wash. You can measure the value in how your network responds to you. Now, more important than that, it's something that allows you to grow because your network is a mirror of you. Okay. So as a young idiot who was way too smart and way too aggressively incompetent, it was good for me to have strong, respectable people around me that could sort of smack me around a bit and say, I know you can't do that today, but at the time it was really good for me to have somebody say, that's shit. Okay. What are you doing? This is garbage work. You need to step it up. You're better than that. And then you'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. To have a network that's not just a bunch of patting on the back, but they are meaningfully contributing to your life. This is a gift that you can't get any other way. And I'm afraid that the internet has made communication so easy that people have forgotten the value of it. Hence the book becoming a bestseller in Canada, hence the book speaking to people in a way that we haven't seen a lot of lately, and hence it being recognized by Booklist. Okay, Booklist is the preeminent review platform for booksellers, libraries, and educators. This is a book that has been designed for pro-social actions that are going to return to our societies the beauty that is the human experience. And I encourage everybody to pick the book up. And you don't have to pick the book up to learn what networking is. Just go to stuff, especially stuff you're not used to going to. So if you're not in politics, go join a political party. If you're not a marketer, go to a marketing event with Cyrus. Okay, he hosts a great one. If you're not a technologist, go to a startup night and watch a pitch. Go do things that are unrelated to what you're just doing, and your network will flourish and grow. And more importantly, you'll flourish.
Absolutely. And one of your co-contributors in the book also made that point about networking being fundamentally a tactile experience. She really emphasized the importance of in-person, where no matter how hard you try, what cool tech you use, you can't really replicate that tactile experience of being in person, like, you know, having a beer together, having a burger together, like you and I did. But it sounds like networking, building your network, not only goes linear, but it's compounding and really like exponentially slingshots you. And one of the great things about this book, I think, was that all the stories of the different contributors, and that, by the way, is one of the good things about this book, is that it's not just a manual of how to go do networking. You learn through other people's journeys and experiences, from their humble beginnings to how they made it. And of course, they articulate exactly what they did, but it was actually quite refreshing to read some of these stories. And one of the other themes I found throughout the book is about giving value, giving it back, charity, giving to other people, not always because you're expecting something back, but just because you're genuinely interested in them, or you know, your friends, you want to help each other. Sorry, I just had a reference. I'm going to edit this part out. Yeah. So so it sounds like networking is one of those things that just slingshots you exponentially. And would you say there's anything else like that? Any other skill that could kind of take you to new heights that quickly as networking?
Well, no, let me be plain about this. Everything that has happened in the history of the world has happened because a few people got together, believed in each other, and did something about it. Absolutely everything. Okay. The Commodore computer was not one person. It was a group of people. Okay. The space shuttle, a group of people. The printing press, a group of people. I mean, you had to get that stuff from China to, like, in the end, when humans work together, you got to think about this. Each one of us has a quantum computer in our head. Okay. It's why humans are not LLM nonsense. The large language models and AI is total bullshit. It's no different than Frankenstein crap from the 19th century. It is so dumb, in fact, that it's not even close to intelligence. Okay. We are so many orders of magnitude off the charts. We're in a different zone than an AI, as we like to talk about it today. Even the Tesla, humanoid robots, it doesn't matter, Optimus. They're not even close to what a human is. When you stick this noodle is a quantum computer. Now, if you know anything about quantum computers, they have qubits, okay? And I think the largest one now has 6,000 and change qubits, and that can do stuff that like reinvent reality. Our brain has orders of magnitude more qubits than a quantum computer, okay? So when you stick two people in a room, you have the multiplication of several orders of magnitude, which is some nutty, crazy number. What if you get 5 people? 20, 100. Or for Citizen, 31 million voters in Canada, or 250 million voters in the United States, and so on and so forth. The combination of humans is the most powerful force everywhere and forever, okay? And for the next several centuries, we will remain the pinnacle of intelligence, okay? Until we create something far more interesting than the nonsense we've created now. Even though it looks fancy, remember the old adage, something sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic, according to people who don't know how it works. But I'm here to tell you, every one of those AI models is nothing more than a really advanced calculator. Okay, that's it. And I know that's disappointing, but it still means something. All this business that humans are going to be replaced and all that nonsense, it's crap. What's going to be replaced is the busy work, okay? The bullshit we have to do to get things done. Like when I first started out at that company I told you about that got bought, when I wanted to send a proposal to somebody, and I was writing very large proposals, okay, $25 million proposals, I had to print out 150 sheets, 10 copies. I had to bind them. I had to put those doot-doots in them, those foldy little plastic jobs that held the papers. This took more time than building the proposal. Okay, so if you think about how the world changes, the busy work goes away, but the core stuff remains. So today, you still have to make proposals. Okay, if you want to sell something to somebody and it's a institution of any size, they're going to want to do a process to buy something. Okay, and so you still have to do the proposals. Okay, and so it doesn't really matter anymore that you go through the motions. It's really about the quality of the information. Here's the proof. You know that when first computer I told you about, Commodore and the PS2s and all those things came out, the most important software that was released during that generation of personal computers was Excel. But it wasn't called Excel then. It was called something else. It was called Lotus 123. And before that, it was called, I forget the names of the early ones. But spreadsheets were supposed to replace all accountants. All. We don't need accountants anymore. It's over. Spreadsheets. We got spreadsheets. Now, if you think back and you look at the articles of the time, they did pontificate. Whoa, it's going to change. Our PCs are going to remove all the jobs. There was fear that was going to be the case. Now, here's the deal. The number of absolute accountants never dropped, okay? But over time, the quality of those accountants went up, and the shitty accountants, like not shitty accounts, the wrong word, but the busybody accounts that were strictly going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those went away because counting was easier. But accounting incomes on an individual basis went through the roof. That's why today accountants, very respectable. Okay. It's up there with lawyer, doctor. If you're a CA or a CPA, this is one of the great great professional designations for which you can charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. Okay. For that quality of service. That wasn't always the case. There were accountants that were minimum wage, and the lion's share were minimum wage. So like all things, technology comes along, it modifies everything, but it doesn't get rid of the quantum computer need. This quantum computer is still the most powerful device and will be for 100 years, maybe longer.
Yeah, I recently read a very interesting stat. You know how LLMs have these context windows, and like ChatGPT is, I think, 400,000, Claude is 800,000, Gemini is 200,000, whatever. So I read the stat of the context window of the human brain. It's in the billions.
Oh, no, it's like you're talking about something. And by the way, that's only our estimate. Okay. We don't have a clue. And I'll tell you why. Because we don't even know how this noodle works. So we can only see certain processing abilities of the brain, okay? What we've discovered recently is the very shapes of it, the way they're structured, the organization of the peptides. These create orders of magnitude more processing capacity than even what you just described. So, I think we're going to soon find out that we're not, when I say we're not in base reality, I don't mean that this is the Matrix. I mean, the thing that we think of as base reality, this sort of soup up here with this floating piece of meat in it that we call a brain, I think you're going to find that that's not reality. okay, you're going to find that the reality is this sort of quantum processing thing that goes way beyond the brain. And it's connected in a larger sense. We're all connected to each other in a larger sense. And so humans are not quite as individual as you think we are. We actually have radiation emanating from our bodies. And if we come into proximity with each other, these things become entangled. And then you start to get some really weird shit happening. It's why, like, you think about somebody and they phone you and, like that's, we're just on the cusp of figuring all this stuff out. And I think you're going to find that our brains are way cooler than any computer that we can so far do.
Yeah, well, another interesting stat I learned just last week was the hallucination rate of these LLMs. Even the best ones, it really surprised me. And the reason I looked up this stat is because a news article came out from Australia, back where I used to live. I still stay in touch with that environment. That Deloitte had to refund the Australian government $400,000 because they used AI to generate some parts of their report, and some parts of the report made no sense.
Those reports are written by 23-year-olds that have just graduated from school, their first-year associates at Deloitte, right? And then it bubbles up, and then somebody signs off on it. But the truth of the matter is that that's a perfect example of the problem with these things. Do you remember when LLMs first came out? There really wasn't a lot of hallucination. Okay. But now we have these super advanced LLMs trained on trillions of units of data rather than millions of units of data, say 10 or 20 million back in the first ones versus trillions now in the new ones. The new ones hallucinate more than the old ones. Okay. And there's a reason for this. All right. There's a maximum limit to what can be true. There's this graph that you can go look up online. It's sort of the truth line where you can get pretty close to being true with very little information in your possession. But to get any further, it's just, you're almost causing more problems than you're solving. And so, the future of AI is not more LLMs that are stronger and have more information. The future of AI are refined LLMs that do their thing, but the hallucination is removed from the equation through a concept called grounding, okay? And grounding is you have some referential material that's absolutely true and factual, and you can use that to obviate the need for the LLM to try to solve everything, okay? Because it's almost like the shortcut. If you remember the movie, The Imitation Game with Alan Turing, well, they couldn't figure it out because there were so many possibilities. Oh my God. But then one day, the girl made a comment that said, my boyfriend, she was talking about the person she's monitoring in the radio on the German side. He didn't follow protocol. And he put his girlfriend's name as the first inputs of the day. And that gave them a window into how the ciphers were built and how the Enigma machine that created the ciphers were wired. And so by working backwards using those computers, the spinnies that you see in the movie, they were able to crack that day's code. But that was because it was grounded, okay? And the grounding, finding real information and saying, this is a fact, put it in there, that helps. That's just a funny example I'm giving you to make it simple and accessible. But the nature of it is that we cannot get better truth using LLMs until we ground information. Otherwise, that's why they're hallucinating, because they can't find it, but their job and their algorithm is to complete the task. And they're going to complete it, whatever they have to do it. And this is where we get into what is intelligence. All this is a thing that's running. You might as well just be a bunch of gears in Antikythera mechanism. It's the same thing. It's going to run, and it's going to do what it's going to do regardless of whether or not there's something going on.
Yeah, and so the statistics on hallucination rates were insane. I mean, the best one was Gemini at about 2%. ChatGPT was 5 to 10%. Claude was 10 to 15.
Yep.
And the rest were like more than 15. So at best, 1% of the time, they make stuff up. And the reason for this is, I think, goes back to your point about the powerful neurology of the brain, that these LLMs, and my understanding is that they basically predict the next word or the next token, as they call it. And so because of the predictive nature of it, there's randomness, and that randomness leads it to make mistakes. With the current LLM, and right now it sounds like LLMs have hit like a ceiling. Because I think their theory was, hey, if we train it on more and more and more data, it's just going to keep getting more and more intelligent. Because that's what they found going from GPT-3 to 3.5 and to 4.
Absolutely. Well, you're going from tiny data sets to something a little larger. It's obvious it's going to have a major effect, but there's a diminishing rate of return on that.
Yes, and that's what I think what we saw with GPT-5. We were expecting AGI, and we got something that
You got somebody who was smoking weed or something instead, okay? And I think that's the measure of it, okay? If somebody has a process that mimics, which is basically what this is, it's mimicking human behavior by using speech patterns and grammar and text as its foundation, okay? So you take, and basically training data used to be specialized training data. We get it from a data. Now we just suck the whole internet down and say, right, organize that pattern recognition. And on that basis, we train ourselves continuously, which means that all the information humans are producing outside of the dark web, okay, the indexed internet, is the training data. Let me ask you a question. What percentage of that data is true? you know, like, TikTok,
yeah, yeah,
Instagram,
Reddit,
Reddit. I mean,
yeah,
this stuff is, you're talking about training this thing on loony bin stuff, okay? And it helps with the prediction algorithms. But you're talking about something that is not fundamentally a human, but sounds like a human. So you expect it to do human things because we understand language. If you just go study what language is, you ask a linguist, they're like, I'm not surprised any of this stuff is this way. It's because they've been talking about this stuff forever. Language is only one piece of software that we humans have built. The human condition is a lot more complex than language, despite language being one of the important elements about what a human being is. If you think about that and you think about how limited that therefore is, you shouldn't be surprised once you look at it and go, oh, I'm disappointed. It didn't turn out to be a sentient intelligence that we all expected. But this is the most important second point, I think, and that is all new technology goes through this concept of the hype cycle. Okay. First it's nerds like me that are building something. Citizen was 4 years ahead of its time. We didn't even call it AI back then. It was just big data. Okay. Like you had big data, you were doing pattern recognition. So if you apply that to democracy, that's a really interesting way to surface how people feel about, democratic reality. That was the way I described it at the beginning. And then ChatGPT came along, OpenAI, and they called it a generative AI. And this took off. Like the minds of people, not nerds, caught on to this. And within a 2-year period of time, we went from, that's a really cool computer that's able to speak to me like that. I rather like that. Having a digital assistant that knows everything, so I don't have to know everything, to we're going to have the Cylons from Battlestar Galactica are going to turn on us. And we're going to have nuclear war. If you know the Battlestar Galactica sort of lore, okay? Or Terminator, the movie. Oh, the AI is going to get us. Look, this stuff happens every time new technology comes along. People go nuts. They lose their minds. And as we talked about with War of the Worlds, or electricity. Oh, electricity is going to reanimate everything in the world. And now we're going to have this Frankenstein that's going to come along, and these robots. We've been saying this AGI crap for 200 years. And we're going to continue saying it for 200 more because the technology is nowhere close to AGI and I don't mean what scientifically could be called AGI. I'm talking about what people think is AGI, which is totally different than, say, a science-based definition of the thing. So we're in cuckoo land is the short version.
It's funny you pointed out that people have been talking about AGI for centuries, really.
Yeah.
Probably since electricity came out.
What about the Oracle of Delphi? Little steam,
right.
That's $1,000, and they just gave you a prediction. Oh, it went up.
And it turns out that right now, after looking at those hallucination stats and finding out about this Deloitte problem, you realize that you can just have AI produce a deliverable for you and hand it in without somebody actually reviewing it and fact checking it and making lots of corrections. MIT recently did a study on the net impact of implementing AI and in processes, and they found that it's actually neutral. It's
exactly what happened to the accountants, remember? What'll happen is specialization will increase, income will increase, but the number will not decrease. Okay. And it's obvious that that's going to be the case. For to anybody who has been using this stuff, who knows that it's absolute shit. Okay. When it comes to producing stuff. For instance, I had to teach myself how to write an academic paper. I didn't know squat about it. I tried to get somebody to help me, but they're all specialized if you're an academic and they don't want to work on stuff, and it's fine. So I used Claude, in fact, to help me understand how I write this paper. I have this research thing I'm doing and I'd like to structure it as a paper. And so I wrote it the first time. I asked it to do that. I said, here's my thesis. Here's all my stuff. Can you organize a paper so I could put stuff into it? It came back and it even gave me references based on everything that I had theorized. And half of them were bullshit. And it had stuff like the author's name, the publisher, the page that it was. So it was, it was absolute bullshit. Okay. Total and complete fabrication. And so I liken it to this. Would you allow Excel to do your taxes? It's a little bit like saying Excel's going to do my taxes. Excel might help you do your taxes, but because it can count and structure and print out stuff for you. But are you really suggesting that Excel can do your taxes? That is a hard thing to do. Okay. Making tax planning decisions, deciding how to file the papers, what to put in, what not to put in. Excel and what we're calling AG, they roughly have the same level of capability when it comes to end results. And that is none. It is not reliable in any way, to be clear. The human must use their ability to discriminate good from bad information as a mechanism to succeed. And it's the quantum computer that provides us with that ability. And make no mistake, the brain's a quantum computer.
Yeah, I believe it. I definitely believe it. But back to the MIT report that I looked at, another thing that's happening there is that companies are laying people off to replace them with AI. Then they find that because of all the mistakes the AI is making, the people that they kept now have to work twice as hard just to fix all that.
You have that experience, I understand, with the U.S. government.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But so there is a desire among the CEOs of especially publicly traded companies to lower costs, increase efficiencies, but
their job.
Yourself, exactly. So you're and yourself as a former CEO of a couple public companies and also board advisor, et cetera. What would be your advice in terms of this issue of trying to replace people with AI to reduce their costs and increase their profits?
Well, the short answer is do it. Okay. But like any project, so for instance, if I look back at, say, when we came along and said, hey, you don't need network guys anymore, you don't need data centers, you don't need software boxes, just buy a subscription. Okay. That was a high risk maneuver for these guys. And so the good companies would spend their time doing due diligence and calculating what this could possibly create for the company, including the risks, the unknowns, the potential stuff that could be black swan in nature. Every leader of a corporation has a fiduciary obligation to make all decisions eyes wide open. And what that means is anything that was predictable, you should have known. Okay. And if you didn't predict what a reasonable person should have known, then you're going to be on the hook for killing the company. And then the veil will be brought back and you could be found negligent as an officer or director of corporation. In the United States, as a public CEO on Wall Street, it goes further. The CEO is criminally responsible if they allow anything to happen in the corporation that wasn't predicted. Okay. Now that puts a level of onus on the leadership of a company that I think is the type of onus that needs everybody to keep in the back of their mind whenever they make a decision. For instance, would you change your computers in your office for all employees and network and cloud without asking, if I do that, will it break something? Like it seems to me that that's been the decision-making power so far that people have applied to AI. Okay. And a lot of people have just said, oh my God, look, it works. Get rid of that whole department. To only find out later that you kill everything the company's good at. All right. we can never underestimate the value of anybody in a corporation. And if we do, no matter whether they're high or low, it doesn't matter. You never underestimate the value of somebody. And here's the story that tells the full story. Okay, here's an example that everybody can understand. You don't have to be technological to get it. There's a big movement in the sort when the internet came along to get rid of doormen in New York. Now, if you know anything about New York, it's all buildings and they have concierge, okay, in the building. The concierge takes packages, opens doors, calls taxis. And you think like, well, why do we have to pay somebody 80 grand a year for a door? Okay. And that's how people were talking about them, as if these people didn't add value, as if they were just, people taking pay that they didn't deserve. And a lot of people went so far as to denigrate those doormen. Okay. Much to their cost. Because when they finally did it and they replaced it with just the, beep you in kind of thing in New York, there were all kinds of unanticipated, it was called, consequences. The people who were homeless moving into the lobby, people getting in while he was looking, whereas the concierge would have said, get out of here, what are you doing? And the people like taking over parking garages, no security walking around, lots of damage to because the eyeballs of the person who was responsible for the door also was a continuous set of eyeballs on the asset, the building. Hey, look, we got a major crack up there. Maybe we got to fix that. That stuff doesn't happen when you get rid of this. And so everybody in New York that had a doorman who got rid of them eventually brought back doormen. Okay. And you think, and this is a perfect example of somebody diminishing the value of a human being and not placing value on somebody. And when I say that I come from people who are working class, I mean it. Too many people say, oh, the working class, this or just that, they're this. The fact of the matter is, almost every time you get rid of those people, there's a cost, okay? Major cost. So for instance, what happened when call centers moved all of their call centers from internal, meaning like Bell Canada had their own call center downtown Toronto, to we outsource it. It's no longer a Bell Canada call center. What happened to the quality of the interaction with people on call centers, say in the late night? Oh, it became awful. And then we went a step further. We moved them offshore. So now there's no cultural similarity between the person calling and the person answering. There might be linguistic barriers. There might be qualitative barriers. The simple fact of the matter is that even though it was on an hour cheaper, you had to triple the number of calls. So you tripled your cost you went up 1.5 by doing it. Okay. This stuff is so predictable every bloody time, and nobody thinks one move ahead. And you need to think moves ahead. This AI is so much more interesting to people that everybody thinks now that they can get rid of everybody and everything. Their lawyer, their doctor, think about this now. People are going to go to an AI instead of going to a doctor. And they're going to say, oh, it's the same. He knows everything the same. Let me tell you something. He doesn't know everything the same, okay? You have to understand that the human being is more than the sum of the human's knowledge. Instinct, the ability to put stuff together. It's completely unrelated. You know what, Cyrus? I remember 14 years ago when we met, there was this. Now you've shown up and you're presenting with that. We need this. Okay. That's the kind of stuff that you're not going to find, okay, in sort of automation. I think we should do automation, but I think that the future of human work is absolutely bright. And I don't think anybody should stress about it.
That's great to hear, because there's so much doom and gloom about this. And I think your perspective is really great here, because you have that technology background from the .com era. You've been in AI for a long time, before there really was AI from what I saw.
Well, actually, I was the head of a public company here in Toronto. Actually, it was a Wall Street company. But it was headquartered here in Toronto. And we built one of the very first AI companies, period, 2011. Okay? And we were the first app traded on the Bloomberg App Store, okay, which is, Bloomberg Terminal that is offered, or Thomson's Terminal, where traders and finance people use it because they get guaranteed quality news, plus they get guaranteed signals and information about finance. Very expensive. It's like several thousand a month to have Bloomberg Terminal, okay? And there's an app store in that. in Bloomberg Terminal, which is an app that you use through a browser now, or a client-based app on, say, Windows or Apple computers. But this is the stuff you see traders, like hedge fund managers and all that stuff. They have the big software in front of them. One of them is Bloomberg Terminal. And we sold this for $400 a month, our software. And it was software that allowed for technical and fundamental analysis of stock prices in real time for derivatives and options. Okay. So we were doing stock picking predictions using a hyper speed connection to the stock exchanges in real time, processing that data and saying, trade, 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 sell, buy, all the different, and giving all of the indicators that were necessary. That was 14 years ago. Okay. Now remember, I did it before that too. Because everybody thinks AI is AI. AI is not AI. AI is a database of information that have relationships to each other. That's it. So, in fact, there's always been AI. Spell check's AI. Okay? I don't think people understand. Spell check is AI. Okay? Because it knows the pattern, it predicts the word, knows that's wrong. Grammarly was the first really powerful spell check AI because it added grammar to the equation. Okay? And that's why it's called Grammarly. But if you think about it, AI's existed forever. All those video games we played as kids, all the characters shooting at you that you're trying to get in Call of Duty, those are all AIs. They're little algorithms that are non-player characters. That's AI. Nintendo, AI. Tetris, AI. I mean, all that stuff is exactly the same. Jeffrey Hinton started this in the late 60s. Okay, with talking, hello, I am a talking robot. This stuff's been around for so long, and we think it's so novel. I'm here to tell you it's not novel. It's just computing, okay? We call it AI now. We'll call it something else in another decade, okay? Once we figure out it ain't that smart, we'll call it something else. It'll be called Excel, whatever. But the thesis here is that we've gotten so hung up on AI, we don't even know what the thing is anymore. And I think that's the fundamental issue, is that when we cool off and calm down, you're not going to let your company be run by an AI. Because it might kill your company. Are you willing to do that? I'm not. Okay. Or hurt your kid. Or look what happened to the kid that was using it as a friend and started to use it to ask questions. A teenager that's kind of not too, teenagers at the best of time are a bit of a mess mentally because they're growing and developing. And so they talk to an AI, I'm sad, I'm depressed. And oh, well, if you're depressed, what can I do? And it started making recommendations could you imagine hallucination in that kind of scenario? Kid killed himself.
Disastrous.
Awful. So you really have to know that the technology is unbelievably powerful, but that it's just a non-player character in a video game. That's all it is, a really advanced one. It looks really like, wow, that's photorealistic and it talks to you. Play a video game these days on a PC that's up to the minute and it's indistinguishable from real life. Okay. If you put it in a VR headset, okay, you would think you were talking to regular people, but it's not. And if you rely on the advices that you get from these people in anything other than playing the video game, you're going to find that their advice is damaging, to say the least.
Yeah, well, Deloitte learned that the hard way, and that's done a lot of damage to their reputation, which is everything to them. The reputation as a service provider of intelligence is everything. So I'm sure Deloitte will be fine; they'll survive. But if it was a smaller firm, they would have been crushed by that. And that example you shared of that teen, that isn't actually those examples are actually very recent. Here in late 2025, a few weeks ago, I read a guy asked ChatGPT 5, the latest state-of-the-art version, what for dietary recommendations, and it advised it to add more chloride to its diet. It meant sodium chloride, but it said chloride. So this guy went and drank chloride and ended up in the hospital.
You don't say. So, there's an old saying, and I think that the old sayings are worth more now than they used to be. I discounted these a lot when I was a kid, when I was being told these things. But if somebody's going to jump off the bridge, do you do it too? Yeah, in other words, just because an AI says something, if you follow the instructions to the letter without verifying, you're basically jumping off a bridge, not knowing what's down at the bottom. Might be water, might be rocks. I don't think people should do anything that matters with an AI with what I would call an open mind. I think they should have a closed mind. I think they should use it as a tool. like anything else, but I think like any tool, it should be used with great respect. Okay. If you have, for instance, a drill in your hand, a power drill, people think it's just a drill. It's no big deal. Anybody can use a power drill, right? I can use a DeWalt power drill. You know what? Give a DeWalt power drill to anybody who's never touched one, and their friggin' arm will be spun off because they didn't expect the torque. Okay. And you wonder why these guys that are in construction have forearms the size of my legs. The answer is they know what they're doing and they're pros. All right. And they can use those tools like a ballet. It's almost artistry watching them do it. But if you give that to a kid, or you give that to somebody who's uninitiated, or somebody who's very weak, they might kill themselves. Okay, I think that we think of computers as non-nefarious actors. In the cyber world that is today, there's nothing more dangerous than a thinking computer. Nothing. Not nukes, not biochemical weapons, nothing. And this is why it has to be respected. We need to train people properly. We need to educate like any great tech. Remember, I don't know if you had this when you were kids, but we had power tool shop and we'd cut wood and metals and learn how to do all this sort of stuff, because back then, before the internet, that was really, really important. And it was a rather interesting path to make lots of money. Okay. You go out right now and become a tradesman, you make 150 grand a year like this. No problem at all. But no, I'd rather have a university degree and make 40. Not very bright. We used to train people in schools about this stuff so that they could pick that. And instead, we thought everybody should get a university degree. What a shame. Okay. Because the money is not there in white collar jobs. Okay. The money's there in blue collar, real money. I'm talking about people with skills, not laborers. Okay. An industrial mechanic, a welder, a carpenter, a pipe fitter, a sheet metal specialist, these are the people who have tertiary education that have spent 5 years learning how to use those tools. And we don't give people 5 minutes training on AI. And AI is every bit as damaging or potentially damaging to society than these great electric tools could be. Okay, so it's beggars belief that that's the case, especially kids. If there was something you wanted to block kids from using, it's not Instagram, okay? It's AI. And I don't mean that they shouldn't be using it and being taught about it. I just mean that to give somebody access to an unrestricted AI is to put a powder keg into a child's hand and expect it not to blow up. I mean, we live in a world where we once more have a Promethean power that we've unleashed. And that Promethean power needs to be treated with great respect. And I think a lot of people have just sort of...
Yeah, well, the other thing that's great about hearing these thoughts from you, Murray, is that you're not just a technologist and a futurist, but you're also a huge reader of history. So a lot of your predictions and clarity in terms of your outlook on the future is grounded in history.
Yes. It's there was an interesting byproduct of being like a nerd that got bullied as a kid. I had consumed more information than most people by the time I turned 18, than most people will consume in a lifetime. Okay. So I had read everything. I used to sit in the library in my neighborhood and read books. That was one of the things that my dad and I did together. Okay. Like we'd go and read books all the time. And without my dad, I'd go alone. And so I read everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. And so that has become a habit of mine in my life. The largest portion of my day is reading. Still. Now, it doesn't mean I'm reading paper books all the time. Occasionally I do, especially the ones that I get. But the fact of the matter is that those books, okay, are now on tablets, they're on the internet, there's videos instead of reading. Like consumption of information, I think, is the single thing that most people could do with more of. Because most people are specialized in whatever they do, and they don't have any general knowledge. And so they think this stuff that comes along in their specialty is like novel and interesting, but they have no reference to history. You see this stuff happening over and over and over again. And the old adage is simple. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Okay. So if you really want to have a Frankenstein society afraid of their own shadows, keep on keeping on with AI just the way you are. And you can go have your panics and you can have your anti-Frankenstein societies and you can have your learn history and nothing will scare you.
Yeah, some of the historical stories that you've shared with me about the printing press, about the weaving machine, et cetera, they've really helped me more clearly see where we're at right now during this AI revolution. Right. Do you think, so you said earlier that back in back when spreadsheets first came out, that everyone was going crazy about accountants losing their jobs, and eventually, but instead it turned out that it actually raised their value and their incomes. Do
Yes.
you expect that to happen with most professions?
I think that the long-term tendency in most professions, now look, some professions are going to go away. Okay. It's just natural that they go away. There's a life cycle to a profession. A profession by definition is a specialty. All right. If you're not a specialist, you're a generalist. Not you do regular white collar jobs or you do labor jobs. Okay. That's a generalist. A specialist is somebody like an MD or an accountant or a lawyer or an engineer. They get special training and they get special certification so that they can do their stuff. But I think that the long view of history says that the way the evolution of everything is towards higher income if it's not a failing profession. Okay. So you'll always end up with a higher income when you have better tools. Example, when power tools came along in the 19th century, electric. Okay. Did we pay carpenters more or less? They make a lot of
Right.
money now. They didn't make a lot of
Yeah.
money. Okay. Did we pay doctors more now than less, given all the technology they have for diagnostics and all those machines and all that stuff that was basically the AI of its time? More. Okay.
Yep.
So pick a profession. If it still exists, it's generally going to be going in a certain direction. Non-specialized, what I'll call generic activities, like basic labor, basic processes and functions, that is all likely to be replaced in the long run. But you're never going to replace, the people running the systems or the people making the decisions or the people doing these things have to be done by a noodle that has responsibility. Humans don't want to interact with something that has no human responsibility behind it, because then it has no morality. And if it has no morality and ethics, then it doesn't care what the consequences. This is why people shy away from using DeepSeek, which is an LLM from China that was famously built for very cheaply, that does more or less as much as well as GPT-5 and all of the best current models. But do you trust it? Who
No.
owns it? Who controls it? Who's
Yeah.
watching that data? Who
Mhm.
trains it? And I
Mhm.
guarantee you that's worth way more than the algorithm that underpins an AI. The very nature of an AI is it's so personal that you wouldn't give your personal information to the Chinese Communist Party. Okay, because they're nutters, and this is the reality of the world. This is why Citizen on my end has to be a sovereign AI controlled by the people in every single country, because nobody can control the data that I'm going to have unless they are collectively the citizens of that polity. Okay, if Murray controlled it, fundamentally, would people believe the data's there, or would they think I'm manipulating the crap out of it like Elon did with X, for Trump? This is the future, okay? Trust in your technology is always important. The old saying before we got into the AI world was nobody got fired for hiring IBM or Deloitte, okay, for
Yeah.
that matter. Why?
Mhm.
It had nothing to do with their technology. It had everything to do with the trust you had in their tech. There are 100
Mhm.
people that could do what they do. Doesn't mean that it was, and they charged more. Okay. But they're still the ones everybody wanted, because trust is more important than technology. Okay. This is a human condition. Okay. It doesn't matter what we do. We don't want to deal with a computer that doesn't care. That's the story in Terminator. I had a brain fart there. The fear of AI, Frankenstein, the fear of AI, all of these things, fear of a greater power coming to take us. We need to get over that and just treat AI like it is a Promethean power that's very capable of burning us to the ground.
Yeah, and not only does it not have any, feelings or morality or empathy, because it might never, because it's not embodied, it can't feel pain. Not only that, but like we said earlier, it hallucinates 1, 5, 10% of the time and just makes stuff up.
That's a lot of
So
time. Okay. Could you
yeah,
imagine a system that only worked 9 out of 10 times? Like, think about the internet. You're working it from home. What if it only worked 9 out of 10 times? Okay. Do you know that the internet works 99.999% of the time and people still lose their friggin' minds?
yeah,
I'm down. AI works 9 out of 10 times. That's anathema to functional civilization. It just doesn't work. And
yeah.
that should scare you. It should be used as a tool. It's basically a better dictionary, and treat it like that. until such time that we can verify the potential, meaning the outputs, with some qualitative analysis, it is not for anybody to trust.
Yeah, and then the third thing is it relies, even if when it doesn't hallucinate, it's pulling its data, like you said earlier, from the internet, from Reddit. Reddit, by the way, I used to think Reddit was the cesspool of the internet, really. And
What
it
could
probably
go
still
wrong?
exactly. So it's pulling its data from what most professional B2B marketers or most people in corporate would think is a complete cesspool that you would stay the heck away from. Reddit, by the way, is actually a really hard place to crack for companies looking to advertise and promote themselves on social media. It's very hard to crack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this AI is pulling its data from Reddit. So Perplexity, I think, cites Reddit like 20% of the time.
Well, if you look at the top 10 things cited by all major LLMs, Reddit's there. Okay.
Yep.
And it's the who's who of what you would think. Wikipedia, this, that. But don't forget, the most important thing to remember is that all the internet, the indexed internet, okay, that is the non-cuckoo internet, like drug dealers and the dark web and all that kind of stuff. The regular indexed internet represents maybe 5% of the total data on Earth. Okay. It's the private data that's really going to be interesting because private data has a tendency to be a lot more accurate. So for instance, if I have records inside of my CRM system that I created that we talked about at the beginning of this, and it's all my customers for a given phone company or the government of Canada, you know that passport information is correct. Okay. So you have ground truth in private data sets. The real future here is to ground using private data sets this publicly generated large language model and all of its derivatives that have sort of come out. That's where the real value of AI is going to be. Large language models today are trying to make predictions that they can't possibly make. And so they're hallucinating because they're trying to do something that they don't have at the core of their data set. Okay. But if they had the data about every Canadian, they could say the census data that was verified. And all of a sudden they could validate what they have against that and correct, and then present something that's a little more interesting than bullshit data. Okay. Like calling you Cyrus the Great instead of your real name. Okay. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is that 95% of the data in the world is not available outside of private situations. And so the future of AI is to integrate those privately so that outputs can come. And that's where companies are going to do magnificent things, because this will take a lot of the busy work out of how companies surface problems or ideas or innovate. It's going to change the flow that companies follow to get things done. But it fundamentally is going to be human-based. Okay, it doesn't matter how good this shit gets, it's going to be human-based for the foreseeable future, because it's not yet capable of even the agentic AIs, which are like the personification of an AI that'll do a job for you. It'll just go from system to system and do it. You give it permissions. Even that is going to invent, oh, I should use a system that didn't exist. And then you're going to end up sending your private data to some third party that's your competitor, and you kill your company. You don't want to be relying on these things for anything mission critical at this point without a human being doing oversight. And I have to actually get going here pretty quick, Cyrus. Or David, is there anything you want to cover before I do?
Yeah, just a little bit about Citizen and your upcoming book, but also you mentioned the responsibility that goes along with a new technology like this. And, you advised earlier that CEOs, it's their fiduciary duty to be able to predict all the risks and consider all the risks before
all the
rolling
known
out of
possible
technology.
risks, not all the risks,
Yes.
just the reasonably
Yes.
foreseeable.
Yes. And the ones you've identified are reasonable. But speaking of which, in the book, you mentioned that the jump from non-manager to manager was big for you, but the jump from manager to public CEO was immense.
It's, poor boy made good. You make manager, you feel like a superstar, giving out business cards, all this sort of stuff. But what you don't realize is the jump from senior executive turbo corporate vice president to, which is the same as manager, okay? Or team lead, it's all the same shit. If you're not the CEO, it's all the same shit, okay? When you are the CEO of a company, the prime minister of a country, the general of an army, the head of a startup, the executive director of an organization, pick your organization, okay? The buck really does stop with the CEO. And the CEO has special responsibility for the stakeholders that are attached to that company, whether they be employees, investors, increasingly society, the environment, all of the different stakeholders that you must take into account. And it's not so much CEO-ship is not about knowledge or everybody says I could be a CEO. Let me tell you something. Impossible that more than 5 out of 100 people could be a CEO. And the reason I say that is not that they wouldn't be capable of understanding or undertaking. It's the pressure that is unexpected. Okay. It's the expectations that are unexpected. And it's the fact that you are singly to blame for whatever happens because you've been given the keys to an organization, whether you built it or not. You have shareholders and investors, and they have legal obligations and expectations. They have legal expectations, and you have legal obligations that you must undertake. And if you don't do it, as I said to you before, in America, for instance, which is not the case in Canada, although there's other laws that apply, it's just not quite the same. When I certify a public document for a corporation as a CEO of a corporation, I am unable to then subsequently claim I did not know. And that's the purpose of the certification, okay? When I file my quarterlies, you know how Trump's now talking about just having twice annual? I love that because it's going to reduce the burden. It's a big burden to produce that every quarter. And when I say burden, I mean burden because every word you put out there exposes you because this is your certified stuff, okay? And there's no then claiming, oh, I didn't know that employee was stealing money back there. I have to have controls in place to make sure none of that shit happens. And if I didn't, I'm criminally liable. So it's not about can you ask ChatGPT what a CEO does? There's another part of it. Do people believe that you're capable of being a CEO? You know, do you have the influence, the stamina, and more importantly, the credibility and the strength to stand in front of people that are like shooting darts at you? Okay. Do you have the gravitas to make people want to invest in a company? Do people trust that you are as bright as you think you are? Are your ideas really good? Can you sell them? What if shit hits the fan? Are you the guy they can rely on to fix it? These are tests that all people must go through as they ascend in leadership. But you never, ever understand what it is until you actually have to do it. The first time I was a CEO, I didn't know what I was doing. Okay, not a clue. And so I didn't even know until hindsight came along if I did a good or a bad job. And so that's why I say the leap was greater because when I went to manager, it's pretty obvious. There's some processes I had to follow. I had to do reviews. I had to do this. I had to hire, fire. It was pretty simple stuff. Okay. You had to keep the place operating and the machine, well maintained. But CEO is you need to be thinking 10 moves ahead of everybody else. You need to be thinking 10 years ahead. You need to be preparing for inevitabilities and black swans that nobody else worries about. Okay. When everybody leaves for the day, you're left holding the bag. And so CEO was the hardest experience I ever went through. And as I did it more and more times, it becomes easier, of course, because you're used to it. Think about going from baby school to high school, how stressful that was, or high school to university, how stressful that was. It's one of those great jumps in your life that when you ascend to CEO, which is about as high as you can get in terms of business structure, outside of being the founder and the owner, which is different, and especially if it's other people's companies, not just I set up a concern and call myself a CEO. There's a lot of people out there that are CEOs that have never run anybody else's money. They've never had hundreds of employees inside of their corporations. They don't understand what it means. These are sort of small sole proprietorships. But when you have other people in your charge, their money, their lives, their futures, you make decisions completely differently.
So you mentioned being CEO of a publicly traded company is a huge responsibility. Probably keeps you up at night some nights. But what you're working on right now, CITIZN AI, also seems pretty challenging because you are working on a big problem, a global problem that's not only challenging to solve technologically, but then you have to get stakeholder buy-in, and then you have people opposed to that idea. Would you say that is it tougher to be a founder of a globally disruptive technology, or would you say it was more challenging to be a CEO of a public company?
Well, let's use a biblical story to evaluate. When Noah was deciding to build his boat, okay, he had some inspiration that got him to do it. Now let's use the boat as the metaphor for the startup. Okay. What happened to Noah? when he built his boat in the middle of nowhere with no water in sight. What did people do to him? Okay,
They
they
laughed at him.
pilloried him, they judged him, they called him names, they threw things at him, they laughed, they ostracized. That's always stage one, because any idea sufficiently great first creates resistance. And that's how you almost know that you're on the right path, okay? You have to survive that. It's not that just because they bug you doesn't mean you're on the right path. It's, can you survive being pilloried and rejected? So in a startup land, you're usually trying to raise money, and you're trying to get people to work for free, and you're trying to, give them stock. And you've got to be able to sell this. And if you can't sell that and get the resources that you need, there's no hope in hell a startup succeeds. Now, it seems obvious. Oh, I have an idea, I can sell it. No, this isn't a car, okay? Go try selling a car on a used car lot and tell me that's not hard. That'll be the hardest bloody thing you ever do. And it's you think of it as such a simple thing. Now take selling that car and amp it up by orders of magnitude in complexity. And people understand what a car is. They don't understand what new ideas are, generally speaking. So with Citizen, specifically, I told people I'm going to reinvent democracy from the bottom to the top on the whole planet. And people looked at me like I had two heads, okay? And I mean, friends of mine who I grew up with thought I was a batshit crazy loser, okay? And they gossiped about me and talked about me to each other, okay? Who does Murray think he is, doing all this business and stuff like this and all this? And do you know how hard it is to hear that? It's soul crushing.
From friends,
okay?
yeah.
If you don't have the constitution to be able to handle this rejection, this abuse, this talking behind your back, this nobody believes in you, okay? You are not cut out to be a CEO of a startup. And I'll leave you with this thought, because I think if you really want to understand, okay, how to handle everything we've talked about, go read the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, the Empire's poet, okay? Everybody's hating on the Empire. I love the Empire as a consequence, okay? The Empire taught us all kinds of stuff. Greatest organization of countries in the history of the planet, all right? And the poet laureate of the Empire was Rudyard Kipling. And If tells the story of what it means to be a person that is working through a hard life and still keeps going and still does it. And another one that I'll point out is an American, not a poet laureate, but a section of a speech that was given at a university by Teddy Roosevelt, Man in the Arena. You read these two excerpts, okay? And what you will find is the strength of your inner self to be able to handle these situations. The advice they give is extraordinary and exquisite. And if you follow the rules of those two, you will be just fine.
I'll definitely check that book out. Murray, you got another book coming up.
I do.
The
Sixth Estate, Governing Ourselves. This is the starting gun for Citizen, the company that you're sort of seeing behind me here with all this paraphernalia. The Sixth Estate is our go-to-market strategy. So I'm assembling a bunch of prime ministers and presidents and premiers and very high-end leaders from across the world, along with my co-writer, David Sabucci, himself a great man, the Honorable David Sabucci, who was the Solicitor General, the head of the Treasury Board, and a variety of other ministerial cabinet positions, in addition to running a $140 billion pension fund, OMERS. He's on the board of directors. We're going to assemble a cadre of people, and we're going to talk about building the next instrument of democracy. We have 5 power estates in the world. The first is the executive power. This is the prime minister and the king. The second is the judicial power. This arrived in 1215 with the Magna Carta, called the common law. The third estate came when Oliver Cromwell cut off Charles' head and instituted permanent parliament. That's called democracy. That's the third estate. The fourth estate came along with the printing press. We had journalists and, the 500 years of people checking in on those 3 other estates. And then the internet. My generation came along and built this thing that destabilized all 4. Okay. It's called the fifth estate, and it's social internet media that is the largest of all share of voice in those power estates. And the key of every power estate since the beginning has been how much share of voice does it command, okay, in society. Prior to the printing press, there was the magistrate and the bishop that controlled all information that you as a citizen would get in a given country. When the printing press came along, That was like social media of its day. And by the way, it caused the same problems as this fifth estate causes today. Exactly the same. We got 200 years of war because of that. The Protestant Revolution, the Enlightenment, we had good, we had bad, extraordinary times. We need a new power estate to manage the world in the social era. Okay, the printing press that came along recently, the modern printing press, and it's called the sixth estate. And it will be the estate of the people themselves, where every citizen in every country will be directly baked into the infrastructure of government. That's called citizen. And that infrastructure will ultimately be owned by the people themselves. And the book, at least my part of the book, because other people will talk about different things, will be about the fact that we can fix all of this. The future is bright. Technology's fabulous, and democracy is still the greatest thing that humans ever invented.
That's really great to hear, Murray, because you often see a lot of doom and gloom as well about democracy. Democracy's dead, it's over, et cetera, et cetera. But it is severely, I guess, damaged because it hasn't caught up with the new world, the world of social media, et cetera. And that's from my understanding, that's kind of what you're solving is real-time data of what the citizens want their representatives to do for them.
I'll go even further. I want a future. Let me tell you about the future. 20 years from now, I've succeeded. Okay. Pretend. What is now happening is politicians no longer tell us what we think, what we want, and we have to choose between what offer A and offer B is. So like liberal or conservative. That will become anathema. We will dictate the agenda, and they will fight over how best to implement it. And that is a dramatically different and much more powerful citizen than something today where it's basically a popularity contest, like fucking high school election, okay? It's ridiculous that we run trillion-dollar economies with a high school fucking election. And I mean that with every swear word I can come up with. It's awful, all right? And we gotta get responsible about this. And I'm building it. And I've done it for 6 years, and I will continue while I have breath in me. But now with this big investment that we've just received, this is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and you also have politicians actually getting behind it as well, because probably what they're seeing is that this will make it a lot more rewarding to be a politician.
Ask any politician that's there today, they'll tell you they hate it, okay? And they do their best, but can you imagine that even your average MP, who's not very popular, receives a death threat a week? I mean, it's anathema. There's no other way to describe what we have today. And most of that is driven by the stupidity of social media. That didn't exist before that. It was once every 2 years, you might get some kind of a weirdo that popped in or sent a weird letter or something, but not like this. You're talking about women and men who've given their lives. They don't make much money as politicians. They get all the bullshit, and they got to take crap from absolutely everybody. No. That doesn't seem to me to be a way to get the best out of somebody whose job it is to go to Ottawa and figure stuff out, or go to City Council in Toronto, or go to Queen's Park. If you do that to people, they're going to be more worried about their bullshit than they are about governing the country. And until such time that we fix that, that will remain the case. And we will get a lesser quality of politician, okay? Because we'll get somebody who can peddle rather than somebody who can think. And frankly, I'd rather somebody who can think than somebody who's a peddler that'll sell you anything and deliver nothing. We've had a lot of that lately, okay? And it's getting worse. And I'm not blaming any party. It's both sides. It's all bullshit all the time.
I'm really glad you're working on this problem and leveraging AI for good. Murray, you and I have become friends. We've had beers, burgers together. So this might sound a bit formal, but I got to tell you, it's a real honor to be your friend and to have the privilege of sitting down and talking to you for a couple hours. We've gone way over time. This is going to be my longest episode, but there's just so much more to pick your brain on.
Right?
We're going to clip it. Yes. We're going to.
Nobody wants to watch 2 hours of nonsense, maybe on YouTube or something, but clip it and we'll get the good stuff out of here.
Absolutely. You bet. Murray, I know you got to go
Roger,
now.
thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Murray. Real pleasure.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, yeah. You too.